They brought her up here to live out her days. So his mother's buried in Milo and he's buried in New Jersey. So I don't think he drew it up that way. It was just a complete juxtaposition. So I invented this character named Ben Harmon, who tells the story. And I'm driving through Milo to go to Tessa's grave, and I drove by this road called Moore's Road, which of course makes sense because she grew up there. But wouldn't you know, the 2 streets down from Moore's Road is Harmon Road. And it just, you know, one of these, like all these things just keep happening with this story. So I started out saying it was 80% nonfiction, but I think it's getting up toward 90 now. So the more I find out, the more I think I was being channeled somehow through the ages. So the myth about writers, this is what everyone would love to think, is that, you know, here's the writer writing in solitude and thinking very deep thoughts, and to some degree that's true, but in actuality, it takes a village to create a book. And it really took a lot of people pitching in to make this book happen. And I just, first and foremost, want to thank Glenn and Tootie and Wayne Bennett from the Historical Society here, who just did tremendous work on my behalf and helped me reduce the number of trips up here, even though I took a number of them. But they dug in and found some things out for me, which were great, as did Richard Shaw, Dick Schofield, and Isaac Crabtree, who did this wonderful drone shot of the cover, which again, found by happenstance. It's almost exactly where Jim Whyte lived, and it has the train and Borestone on it, which also played prominently in the book. So meanwhile, at the printer, I had told my publisher that I was going to be here doing this talk on July 20. I told them on March 24th, I have the email to prove it, that I'm going to be in Monson and I need the books. And the printer thought about it, but didn't quite get there. So we're about 10 days out from actually having the physical book ready. I have one. This is the only copy in existence, and you're free to browse through it. I think they did a wonderful job, even though they're 10 days late with it. But I asked them to, my designer, to come up with a woodcut of Jim White's cabin and put it in the book to give it that sort of authentic 1930s flavor. And I did get some nice shots that Richard Shaw and the Historical Society had. And it's wonderful. And I've, you know, not to pre-sell myself, but I've got a pretty solid following with this one. Earl Shuttleworth was pretty impressed with it, and Everett Potter of Forbes magazine got his hands on it. And also, Michael Keaton happens to be reading it now, and we'll see if Jim Whyte, the movie, I'm hoping. I'm hoping. I want to be in the background like Alfred Hitchcock, walking across one of the train scenes or something, you know? So, you know, maybe that's where the luck comes in instead of the lottery. So you might ask, how do I get a copy? I'm selling them today for $20, and it includes a $3 donation to the Historical Society. Of course, I'll send you a signed copy if you want it signed with just the author's name, or you have someone in mind. I'd be more than happy to do that when I get my hands on them in roughly 10 days. And also I'll ship them free. The way Glenn and I thought it would work best is if you have cash or check, see Glenn. And if you want to have a credit card, see me. I have a square on my computer. And we have a piece of paper. You can write your mailing address and what you'd like me to say inside the book. So that's it. Whoops. So thank you. Any questions?
I sat on the porch of that cabin.
Wow.
I must have been about 15 years old.
15 years old.
my father and my mother wanted to go out and look at the fall foliage. And we walked over to Little Wilson, and we walked up to that cabin.
Wow.
And that had to be about 1937.
Wow. That's great. 1937, he walked up to the cabin and sat on the porch. Fabulous.
That was our Boy Scout camp.
Where was the Boy Scout camp?
Yeah, that was, Alan said that was our Boy Scout camp. And,
Right.
so in the 50s and 60s, Don Keene owned the camp at that time.
Right.
And he allowed the Boy Scouts to go there on weekends. And we'd camp out and we'd hike and fish and
And look for treasure.
look, yeah, well,
I remember all the divots.
there were all these holes dug all around the cabin. But we were just told they hunted for treasure, but never found them, never found any treasure. So I don't remember ever digging ourselves. That sounded like too
Well,
much
I just
work.
remember that there was a trap door that built the camp.
Yes,
Down into a
Root
root
cellar.
cellar.
yes,
And a lot of times, like, if you were a new Boy Scout or a young kid, they'd shove you down there, close the door.
With a stove over, right?
yeah, that was your initiation.
Like a trial. Like, I remember going down there a few times, just digging around, thinking, oh God, wouldn't that be great?
It's nice and cool down there.
It was also good snipe country too, if I
Oh,
remember.
yeah.
Yes. Now, how many of you had heard of Jim Whyte before today? Quite a few, yeah. So after Don Keene owned the camp, he sold it to, I think it was William Schofield, whose son, Dick Schofield, still owns the land today. And in about the mid-60s, or somewhere around there, he did tear the cabin down and replaced it with an exact duplicate. So if you were to look at that today, and you remembered what it looked like when you were a Boy Scout, it looks the same. It's got the porch, it's got the shutters with the triangular holes in them. It looks exactly the same. It now is getting on in years, but it is, it's an interesting duplicate of the original, although it does have a nice slate foundation under it now.
Some of the windows are the original Jim Whyte windows. Glenn and I went up and interviewed him for a couple of hours, which was just fabulous to sit in the replica cabin after all that, and just amazing.
How did you happen upon the fact that he was potentially married with a son, and you're not sure of records for his?
The Dora, well, that part gets really squirrely because the question was, how did I find out that he was married with a I think it was a daughter actually, when he first came back, and that was in one of the articles, ancillary articles, not the original, I don't think. And what was interesting about that is, it's really hard to know if Dora, the woman he showed up with here, was that woman, because if it was, what happened to the child? There was no mention of the child after the fact. So the inference is perhaps that he woke up in the middle of New York City after 34 years of being a world traveler and thought, what am I doing here in the epicenter of noise and congestion, and maybe I need to make a life change. And I want to believe, I think he had the means to do it, that he might have left her with a wad of money and said, I can't do this anymore. But it's really sketchy because we don't know what her name was. We don't actually for certain know the last spelling of Boscene because it comes up in many iterations. I think it's B-O-S-C-E-N-E, which is the one that was in the original article. It would also make sense that if he was of German descent, that he would have been from the Alsace-Lorraine part of France, which is on the German border, which sort of gets you into that kind of a spelling, but who knows? We don't know what her maiden name was. We don't know what she went back to, if she did. It's nearly impossible to go through the lineage stuff. And the other thing I was telling Glenn this morning is I've spent considerable time trying to track down the reports of the woman dying, the 15-year-old girl And even though several reports say that it was a big calamity and it was covered in all the newspapers and everything, I haven't been able to find it. And it's one of those things where you Google, mysterious woman death in 1872, and you get all this stuff from Oklahoma. But it's and so I've been unable to find it, and I've asked some historian friends to really dig deep, and they've been unable to. So that was kind of an interesting chapter too. So yeah.
So about 20 years ago, I was contacted by this guy who had purchased land in Elliottsville along the stream, along the river in there. He purchased 40 acres. And he sent me a bunch of copies of articles about Jim Whyte and claimed he was a descendant of Jim Whyte. And he said, I wonder what Jim would think looking down on me as descendant. And I've been trying to track him down, drove to New Hampshire where he used to live, found out he moved to Massachusetts, haven't been able to contact him. But so I don't know if that's really true or not. And I don't know how, whether it was with Tessa or Dora or the other possible wife. So another part of the mystery.
Yeah, one part of the mystery, which is also interesting, is I was able to, with Tootie's help, track down some of the story of what happened to Tessa. So Tessa, when she left here, she went back to Milo, and her brother died. Her sister-in-law lived on 20 Salem Street in Bangor, and she moved in with her, and her sister was very active in the Etna Spiritualist Society, and was a very strong proponent of that sect. And so she would go there and would bring Tessa with her to spiritualist meetings at this camp, which still exists in Etna, by the way. So after her sister-in-law died, her sister-in-law got buried at the Etna Spiritualist Society camp. However, when Tessa died, she was buried in Milo. And this is how I found out. I went in to find a grave, and I typed in Tessa Moore's Milo, and up came pictures of the gravestone for the Morris family. And what was really interesting is an ancillary photo in that grouping was a separate gravestone, which is at ground level, and it says Lydia Whyte. What? Elizabeth Whyte. And I thought, why did the same spelling? And so why is that? I don't know. Is that you or me?
Good question.
Lizzie Whyte, anyway. Might be because of that. Anyway, it says Lizzie Whyte, and Lizzie Whyte was Jim White's mother. So again, it's like, why? She's not buried with the Moores because Tessa's engraved on that gravestone, but she's a separate stone on the ground. So again, the mystery grows thick because Jim White's mother is buried in Milo, and as I said before, when he died, he was down in Newark. So he's buried down there somewhere. And then the final thing is, Glenn and I have been debating where the 40 grand was. Did it really get buried up here? Or was when he was pointing at the bed saying it's in the and maybe the Freemasons got the 40 grand and never said anything. But he just ran across a letter or some kind of a communication where a local fellow said he was convinced that the money was down in New York somewhere. So who knows, but it's never been found regardless. So.
Did you find anything that would say why his mother changed her name to Whyte if it would have been Beausine? Is there?
No idea.
No.
I mean, I would posit that maybe the father was a bad apple, and that was the kid leaving and coming back to live with his mother was, right. He's gone, we're safe. I don't really know. Huh. But when he showed up from the very first time he showed up here in Monson, he called himself Jim Whyte. And he was never known as William Beausine, right. Except to the Guilford post office. And no one even knew who he was.
The death certificate of Lizzie says Lizzie Whyte died in Monson, Maine. I think it was 1919.
Yeah. So he brought her up here. And then the other thing that's really well known about him in several articles is that he revered his mother. He wanted to make sure that she wasn't in just any old folks home, that he put her up in a really nice old folks home down in New York. And when she really started losing it was when he brought her up here to live out her days at Monson. So there was money there until there wasn't, and then there was again. And you know, what a fascinating guy. It was an amazing story to write.
His mother's maiden name?
Yeah.
Did you?
No, don't know.
Plus,
Maybe Whyte was from that
the
side.
death certificate, no doubt, for her was filled out by Jim Whyte. So she may have been known as Bozine even up here, we don't know.
Or she may have been a Whyte before, and
Right.
her husband was that much of a bad apple. Reverted.
Yeah, he was known as James Burton Whyte. That's what he called himself up here. So who knows where all that came from.
As you can see, there's still a lot of mystery to research.
Yeah.
How about anything with the FBI files? Nothing there? Like they ever came up here? No.
I think they were embarrassed. They came up, found nothing, and went back and said, we have nothing to report. So, yeah, I haven't seen anything there. They knew, I think what they did is they came up to tell them, we know you're on to something and you better get out of the business. And they went off and did their own thing. I think Hoover had other bigger fish to fry back then.
Approximately, when was that train wreck?
1919, December 20th. So it was a winter
I
train
own
wreck.
a piece of land. Across a corner of it, across it was over on Greenwood,
Yeah.
and it was 168. And a corner of my land at that time ended up right at the track.
Okay.
Where the tracks came down from up at Blood down.
Steeply down.
I was told that that corner of my land was within 100 yards
Wow.
of that, where they come together.
Wow.
Wow,
That gives a little bit of trivia.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if you heard that in the back, but his land came up to where the railroad track, within 100 yards of where that crash was. So,
we just heard from Dick Schofield that one of the engines is still there. And so we'll look at that deed. One of the engines from the wreck is still there. Beside the track, that's what we
yeah.
heard.
In Brownwood Junction,
No, right at Ottawa,
in Ottawa.
yeah. And so we'll find your deed that you had and find out where it intersects the track, because we didn't know exactly where along the track it was, so.
maybe the money's under the
When we used to hike into Ottawa on the tracks from Budfish into Ottawa, there was a section where it was all the old rusted cans. Do you remember that?
Yes, that was a
That's where
different,
the wreck was, I think.
no, that's a different wreck. That was
Okay.
later on, and a bunch of cars went off the track. One of them was filled with Campbell soup.
I remember the old cans, but that's a different train wreck?
Yeah.
Who knew?
There is a little monument up there on that bend that I've seen. And it's a small monument, and there is, on each side of the monument, it says about, so there was 2 train wrecks at exactly the same location on that curve. And so it does, I believe it does say about that.
How far from where the road to Ottawa crosses the,
I think I think it was like halfway between the Iowa Road and the Boarstone Road.
Yeah.
Or maybe a half mile, I haven't been up there in a lot of
That
years,
makes
but
sense, 'cause it
it was
curves
right on a
around.
curve there. And it was a small monument on the mountainside, on the Boarstone
Yeah.
side. If you go up there, it's a flat area where
Right?
Any other questions?
Did he have a contact in the Monson area before he came up here?
The thought is that he didn't. He just showed up, and it was odd that he showed up very briefly in 1893, and then he went to Idaho to pan for gold. He had heard Idaho had just become a state. It was Idaho territory before that, and the rumor was that the rivers were full of gold, and he should go out there. And he went out and panned for gold for 2 years and came back. So who knows if part of that was that he actually found gold nuggets and bought the land. But when he showed up the second time, he had a deed to that 30 acres up there, which was also no small potatoes. So he had money the whole time. And, you know, was it the pearl diving? Was it the merchant marine? Was it panning for gold? Was it all of the above? He had a way of figuring out where the action was, and he went. Until the FBI came looking twice.
Very good. So if you want to buy a book, get a hold of me or Jeff. If you want to pay by credit card, Jeff can handle that. And if you have check or cash, I can do it. We'll get it mailed right to you.
And I've got those slips going too.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.